All right, next up we're going to practice how to use probability to solve 1 and 2 trait crosses. So we're going to start off with just a couple of definitions. A one-trait cross is also known as a monohybrid cross. This is going to examine the patterns of inheritance of only a single set of alleles for a single characteristic. So, for example, if we were looking at a set of pea plants and we wanted to study their genetics, we would be looking at all plants that are identical in absolutely every single way, except for maybe one is tall and one is short. And we're going to cross a short plant with a tall plant. So when we say that we're examining a pattern of inheritance of only a single set of alleles for a single characteristic, we are only looking at tall versus short, and we're only looking at height. We're not considering any other factors. We're not considering leaf placement or color of the flowers or color of the pea pods or the types of peas that are producing. We're only looking at a single trait, monohybrid cross, tall versus short. In a two-trait cross or a dihybrid cross, we're going to look at two different characteristics. So we would look at plants that are short and produce maybe a purple flower as opposed to plants that are tall and produce a white flower. So we're looking at in that case, we're looking at two different traits. We're looking at height and color and two different alleles for both of them. In both types of crosses, it's first necessary to determine the gametes of both parents in the cross, so that way we can predict the potential outcome. So we're going to start off by looking at a monohybrid cross involving freckles. So we're going to look at two parents without freckles who have children. In this case, we're going to see that freckles is the dominant allele. So we're going to use capital F for the dominant trait of freckles, or the dominant allele of freckles. The recessive allele is going to be lowercase f, meaning no freckles. So here we have just a quick example. Here we have an individual with freckles and an individual with no freckles. What is the phenotype here? Actually, I'm going to let you guys decide that. So pause this video for just a moment and see if you can tell me what is the phenotype for this individual and what is the phenotype for this individual. So keeping in mind that phenotype is the physical appearance or the physical characteristics, the phenotype for this individual is freckles. The phenotype for this individual is no freckles. No freckles is the recessive phenotype or the recessive trait. So if an individual does not have freckles, they must be homozygous recessive for this trait. Neither of their alleles is dominant, therefore they're showing no signs of the freckles. They have no freckles, so they're, I'm sorry, one moment. The phenotype is no freckles and the genotype is homozygous recessive. What is the genotype for this individual? The interesting thing is we don't actually know. The genotype might be homozygous dominant, or they could be heterozygous. An individual that is homozygous dominant will show the dominant phenotype. An individual who is heterozygous will show the dominant phenotype. So when we are dealing with a monohybrid cross and we are looking at dominant versus recessive phenotypes or dominant versus recessive genotypes, it's not possible to determine the genotype from the phenotype. We do not necessarily know if this individual is homozygous dominant or heterozygous based on the information that we have at this stage. So we're going to look at how a cross would go between two parents who don't have freckles. If both parents do not have freckles, then their genotypes are both going to be FF. They're both going to be homozygous recessive. The only gametes they can produce would contain that lowercase f, would contain the would contain the recessive allele. Thus, all of their children, all of their offspring, will also have that homozygous recessive. They'll also have only the lowercase f, and they will not have any freckles. If we crossed a homozygous dominant man, so a man who was big F, or homozygous dominant, meaning that he had 2 dominant alleles, with an individual or a woman who has no freckles, homozygous recessive, we're going to end up with an entirely, all of the offspring are going to be heterozygous. They're going to inherit a big F from their father and a little f from their mother. All of the children will then be heterozygous because of the combination of the alleles from the parents. Father will contribute a big F, mother will contribute a lowercase f. So the way that we're going to do this is by using a Punnett square. A Punnett square is a really useful tool that can help us predict the outcomes of these crosses. All of the possible alleles for the sperm are going to be lined up along one side, and all the possible alleles for the egg are going to be lined up on the other side. Every possible combination of gametes is going to line up inside of the squares. So here is an example of what that would look like. So here's our Punnett square. It's going to help us predict the possibility, the outcome of a cross. So here we have 2 heterozygous parents. In our previous examples, we only had homozygous parents. The parents were homozygous dominant or homozygous recessive. In this case, we're looking at 2 heterozygous parents. In this case, we have a heterozygous father and a heterozygous mother. Heterozygous father is going to give towards his sperm a big F or a little f. There's a 50-50 chance that the sperm will have either a big F or a little f. Keep in mind that when we undergo meiosis, when we are producing those sperm cells, we're going to be halving the number of chromosomes. So father, here, he has a diploid number of chromosomes. He has 46 chromosomes. When he is producing those sperm are going to end up with a grand total of 23 chromosomes. They will receive either the big F or the little f in terms of this particular gene. The mother is also going to have a big F and a little f. She is also heterozygous. So her eggs will contain either the big F or a little f. Can't be both, but it will be one of each. Or, I'm sorry, it will be one or the other. So if mother produces one egg that has a big F and one egg that has a little f, and the father produces a sperm with a big F or a little f, they could combine in any of the following ways. We could have big F from mother and big F from father. We could have big F from father and little f from mother. We could have big F from mother, little f from father. Or we could have little f from mother and little f from father. In this case, we are going to end up with, well, here, let me just ask you right now, how many of the offspring are going to end up with freckles? How many of the offspring are going to end up with no freckles? We'll have a 3-to-1 chance of the individual ending up with freckles. For every one of these crosses, there is a 3 out of 4 chance, or a 75% chance, that we're going to end up with offspring with freckles, and a 25% chance, or 1 in 4 chance, that the individual will have no freckles. So those are our phenotypic ratios. Our genotypic ratios are going to be a little bit different. Our phenotypes only look at the physical appearance. So whether we have freckles or no freckles, that's going to be our phenotype. Now the genotype is a little bit different. The genotype is asking us what alleles are present. So how many of our individuals are going to be homozygous dominant? How many of our individuals are going to be heterozygous? And how many of our individuals are going to be homozygous recessive? So that's going to be our breakdown. If we cross a heterozygous female with a heterozygous male, there's a 3-to-1 chance that they're going to show the dominant trait. There's a 25% chance that although both parents were freckled, they do have a 25% chance of their offspring having no freckles. So that's going to be our a cross for 2 individuals who are heterozygous. Now these crosses can happen a lot of different ways. If we were to have a person with a dominant phenotype, could be homozygous dominant or heterozygous. So let's say we know that we do know the physical appearance of our parents, but we don't really know the genotypes. So remember how I told you earlier, back when we were looking at this page, we can determine we know the phenotypes. We know that this individual is freckled, and we know that this individual has no freckles. If the individual has no freckles, we know that their genotype is going to be homozygous recessive. If the individual has freckles, we're not sure. They could either be homozygous dominant or heterozygous. Don't really know for sure. Now, based on the information alone, we can't figure it out. We don't know based just by looking at an individual whether they are homozygous dominant or heterozygous. If, however, we were to look at their offspring, we could potentially determine what the parents are based on the offspring. So if we know that the mother does not have freckles, mother must be homozygous recessive, meaning that she does not have freckles at all. So if we know that mother is homozygous, or we know that mother does not have freckles, we know that she is homozygous recessive. If our father has freckles, we do not know if he is homozygous dominant or heterozygous. But a quick Punnett square should be able to help us determine the probability of his offspring having freckles. If the parents, if the father is homozygous dominant, what will his offspring be? We'll have a big F from father and a little f from mother. This individual will have big F from father, little f from mother. This individual will have big F from father, little f from mother, and this one will have a big F from father, little f from mother. In other words, if the father is homozygous dominant and the mother is homozygous recessive, all of the offspring will be heterozygous, and all of the offspring will have freckles. If the father is not homozygous dominant, but instead heterozygous, he will contribute a big F to this individual. So we would have big F from father, little f from mother, big F from father, little f from mother, little f from father, little f from mother, little f from father, and little f from mother. In this Punnett square, the offspring have a 50-50 chance of having freckles and a 50-50 chance of not having freckles. So if our parents are freckles and no freckles, so if one individual has freckles and the other individual does not, we only have to look at their offspring. If any of their offspring do not have freckles, then the father must be heterozygous. If all of the offspring have freckles, there's a very good chance that the father is homozygous dominant. So this is how we can use the offspring to predict the genotypes of the parents. If we have as long as we have phenotype of the parents and phenotypes of the offspring, we can potentially predict what the genotype of the parents are. So one of the things that we want to mention, you know what, actually I'm going to save this slide for our next video. So that was sort of the conclusion of our monohybrid crosses. Please let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. We will be doing a lot of Punnett square practicing in our meeting. So when we get together for our live discussion, we'll do a lot of monohybrid crosses and dihybrid crosses, and we'll practice these Punnett squares pretty thoroughly. So if you're not quite comfortable with those Punnett squares, please make sure you carve out a time to come to that or ask questions on your own, and I'll see if I can find a time that works to meet with you to go over them. But yes, we're going to spend quite a bit of time on Punnett squares during this week. So please make sure that you are comfortable with those.